Hello again and welcome to Breadcrumbs. I'm in Genesis 22, the account of God asking Abraham to sacrifice his most beloved son. The chapter probably in Genesis that most people are aware of and are most horrified by. I'm going to read the first few verses. Now it came about after these things that God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. He said, Take now your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I will tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son, and he split wood for the burnt offering and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham raised his eyes and saw the place from a distance. I've read this chapter many times. I've taught on this chapter. I've seen and taught on the fact that the word love, obey and worship are used for the first time in this chapter, actually, first time in the Bible. And so God is giving us an understanding of what it means to love him and how our love is expressed in our obedience and in our worship. And but all of that, actually this time when I read it, I was struck by something else, and that was that Abraham, in reality, he gave up his son on the day that he set out on his journey. God came to him and tested him, it says, tried him, and said to him, Abraham. And Abraham immediately said, Here I am. He recognized the voice of God. We know that Abraham has walked a while with God. It's taken him a long time to get Abraham and to get Isaac, and Isaac is now probably about 14 years old, something around there, maybe 16. And so there's been a lot of experience between Abraham and God, and God is asking Abraham now to surrender really all, because everything, all of Abraham's hopes, all of his dreams, everything about his life is wrapped up in Isaac. Isaac is the child that Abraham had when he had given up all hope of having a child. Isaac is the promise of God to Abraham. And in a way, God is coming to Abraham here and saying, will you trust me enough to give up even my promise? It's an amazing chapter, actually, and I thought about it for a long time when I was reading it the other day, and I saw that in reality Abraham gave up Isaac the day he set out on his journey, and I thought about what that journey was like and what must have been going through Abraham's mind as he was taking his son, as far as he knew, to sacrifice him in the place that God would show. And I thought about the fact that Abraham would have been wrestling. He would have been. I mean, he's a man who made his decision. He'd made his decision to trust God and to surrender his son. That decision was made. But the thinking it over and the what's going to happen and how's it going to happen and all of that must have been going on as he was walking to this place. And we know, actually, because when we read Hebrews, I think it's chapter 11, verse 19, the writer to the Hebrews tells us that Abraham was convinced that God was going to raise Isaac from the dead. So Abraham had worked his way through to the place where he trusted the one who made the promise. That's what he was trusting. He wasn't trusting in what he had imagined the promise would look like. Because when you think about it, God had promised Isaac to Abraham. He had promised him a son in whom all his descendants would come through, who would make him a great nation. God had promised him descendants more numerous than the stars of the sky and the sand on the seashore. And if Isaac didn't live to have his own children, then that promise was gone, completely gone. I mean, it wouldn't have come about. But you see what happens here. Abraham trusts the one who made the promise rather than his understanding of how the promise will work its way out. I'm sure when he had Isaac and saw him grow and start to become a young man, and I'm sure he thought, as we all do, that our children will go on and they'll marry and they'll have children. And I'm sure Abraham thought that that's how it would be. He had his mindset, he had his limited perspective, and he had already decided how this scenario was going to play itself out. And then suddenly God comes along and he says, will you give up? Will you give up even my promise? Will you give up even the promise of descendants? Will you give that to me and trust that I am a God who doesn't lie? I am a God who is faithful to his word, but who will work in ways that you may not understand. I felt that as I was reading this passage the other day, that God was saying that to me. I have a tendency, I don't know about you, to kind of plot my life to think how it's going to go. I currently have a ministry of Desiring Truth, and I'm always planning about it and loving it and wanting to serve God through it. And I have this thinking process of how it's going to go, what we're going to do, and where we're going to expand, and all of that. And all of the time, I think God is calling me, Anne, will you just trust me? Will you just put your trust in me? Will you do today what I ask you to do? Will you give up the way that you think your life is going to go? And will you completely and utterly give me that life? Give me everything in it. Give me all your treasure. Give me everything that you hold dear. And I don't know how long you've walked with the Lord. I've walked with the Lord quite a while, and I think I have given up a lot of things. Given him a lot, surrendered a lot. And I've made my initial surrender as Abraham made it that day. I have come to the Lord and said, I surrender all, take everything that I have. And I have done that as Abraham did, I think, based on the character of God, the God that I know, the God that has walked with me, the God that has held me, the God that has led me and guided me and directed me, the God who has protected me, the God who has cared for me. That God has come and said, Anne, will you surrender all? And maybe he's speaking to you this morning and saying, will you surrender everything to me based on who I am? Will you give even your ministry, even your work for the Lord, even the thing that you think he's given you? Will you give that to him and trust him that he is at work in your life in a way that you cannot understand? Will you simply hold his hand and walk with him? That's what Abraham did in this story, in this account. He trusted in who God is, even more than his understanding of the promise. God never breaks his word. He never goes back on a promise. He is faithful to his word. He has, Psalm 138 tells us, magnified his word according to all his name. His word is his character. His word is who he is. He will never, ever, ever break a promise to you. But that promise may not be fulfilled in the way that you expect it to be. And along the way, he may come to you and say, will you trust me even with this? Will you surrender this to me, your greatest treasure, your highest hope, your greatest love? Will you surrender that to me, trusting that I love you and I am at work beyond anything you could imagine? That my surpassing great power, as Paul will pray in Ephesians, is at work towards you and in you and through you, and I will bring you forth into a broad, broad place of glory, and you will see things that you never expected to see because you trusted in who I am. That's what I see in this Genesis chapter. That's what I saw the other day more fully, that I can trust God with even his promises to me, even his promise that he created work in advance for me to do. I can trust him with that work, which I love, because I know that he is worth all that I have and all that I am, and I can trust in who he is.